You will die in prison. 2-year-old boy sentenced to life for killing his mother. Before we dive into the story, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. The courtroom was silent. Not the kind of silence you get when people are waiting for something to happen. This was different. Heavier. The kind of silence that presses against your chest and makes it hard to breathe. I stood in the back, notebook in hand, watching something I still can't fully comprehend. At the defense table sat a child, 2 years old. His name was Elias Kane. He wore an orange jumpsuit that hung off his tiny frame like a costume meant for someone else. His legs dangled from the chair, not even close to touching the floor. He looked around the room with wide, confused eyes, innocent eyes, trying to make sense of faces he didn't recognize, voices he couldn't understand. The judge, an older man with deep lines carved into his face, cleared his throat. The sound echoed. "Elias Kane," he began, his voice flat and rehearsed. "This court finds you guilty of the death of your mother, Grace Kane. You are hereby sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole." A gasp rippled through the gallery. Someone sobbed. A few people stood and walked out, shaking their heads in disbelief. Elias didn't react. He didn't know what any of it meant. He just sat there, small and lost, twisting the fabric of his sleeve between his fingers. I felt sick. I'm a documentary filmmaker. I've covered corrupt politicians, cold cases, wrongful convictions. I've seen the justice system fail before. But this was something else entirely. When I first heard about the case, I thought it was a hoax, a sick joke circulating online, a 2-year-old convicted of murder. Sentenced to life? It didn't make sense. It couldn't be real. But it was. I spent weeks trying to get access to the trial. Most journalists had already moved on, chasing the next headline. The story was too absurd, too uncomfortable. Nobody wanted to touch it. But I couldn't let it go. Because the more I dug, the more I realized something was deeply, horrifically wrong. This wasn't just a legal anomaly. This was a cover-up, a perfectly constructed lie wrapped in the language of justice. Grace Kane, Elias's mother, had died under suspicious circumstances. The official report said it was an accident, a tragic incident involving her young son. But the details were vague. The investigation was rushed, and somehow, impossibly, the blame fell on a toddler who could barely speak in full sentences. No one asked the right questions. No one looked deeper except me. As the courtroom emptied, I watched Elias being led away by a bailiff. He turned back once, looking for someone, anyone, who might explain what was happening to him. There was no one. I closed my notebook and walked out into the cold afternoon air. My hands were shaking. I knew then that I was going to do whatever it took to find out the truth, not just for Elias, but because if the system could do this to a 2-year-old child, then none of us were safe. The question wasn't whether justice had failed. The question was, who made sure it did? I started where every good investigation starts, with the people who were there. The problem was nobody wanted to talk. I made a list of everyone connected to the case: Grace's neighbors, the first responders, the lawyers, the social workers, even distant family members who might have known something, anything, that could shed light on what really happened that night. One by one, I reached out. One by one, doors closed in my face. The first attorney I contacted, a public defender who had worked adjacent to the case, refused to meet. When I pressed, he said simply, "I can't help you. Don't call again." Then he hung up. A neighbor who had been interviewed by police agreed to meet me at a coffee shop. She showed up, sat down, ordered nothing, and stared at me with hollow eyes. "I don't know why I came," she said quietly. "I can't tell you anything." "Why not?" She looked down at her hands. "Because I like my life the way it is." She left without another word. It went on like that for days. Evasive answers, nervous glances, people who seemed terrified of something they wouldn't name. I tried contacting the lead detective on the case, No response. The prosecutor's office sent a generic email declining comment. Even Grace's former co-workers at the elementary school, where she had volunteered, wouldn't return my calls. It was as if an invisible wall had been built around the case, and everyone knew better than to try and climb it. But walls have cracks. I found mine in a small town just outside the county where Grace had lived. A retired postal worker named Mr. Brennan had lived 2 houses down from the Canes. He wasn't on any official witness list, but his name appeared in a neighborhood directory I'd pulled from public records. I knocked on his door on a Tuesday morning. He answered slowly, leaning on a cane. He was in his 70s with kind eyes and a weather-beaten face. "Mr. Brennan?" I said. "My name is—" "I know who you are," he interrupted. "Saw you at the trial." I paused. "You were there?" "Just once. Couldn't stomach it after that." He looked me over, then sighed. "You making a film about this?" "I'm trying to find out what really happened." He studied me for a long moment, then glanced over my shoulder, scanning the empty street behind me. "You alone?" "Yes, sir." He stepped aside. "Come in, but make it quick." His living room was small and tidy. Photos of grandchildren lined the mantel. He gestured for me to sit, but he remained standing, hovering near the window. "I don't have much time," he said, "and I'm only talking to you once." "That's fine. I just need to know, that family wasn't what people thought," he cut in. His voice was low, urgent. "Grace was a sweet woman, quiet, but something was wrong in that house. You could feel it." "What do you mean?" He hesitated. "I'd see her sometimes late at night sitting on the porch alone, just staring at nothing, like she was trying to figure a way out of something." "Did you ever talk to her?" "Once. I asked if she was okay. She smiled, but it didn't reach. It didn't. Her eyes said she was fine, but then she said something strange." I leaned forward. "What?" "She said, if something ever happens to me, don't believe what they tell you." A chill ran through me. "Did you tell the police that?" He shook his head. "Nobody asked me. I wasn't on their list. And after the trial..." He trailed off, his jaw tightening. "After the trial, what?" He walked to the door and opened it. "You need to leave now." "Mr. Brennan, listen to me," he said sharply, his voice dropping to a whisper. "You don't know what you're walking into. People have tried to dig into this before. Good people, they stopped real fast. Why?" He looked me dead in the eye. "Because someone made them." Before I could respond, he stepped closer, his voice barely audible. "You shouldn't be messing with this. Whoever wanted that little boy to take the fall, they're still out there. And they're watching." He practically pushed me out onto the porch. As I turned back, he added one last thing. "There's a reason everyone's scared. And if you're smart, you'll be scared too." The door closed. I stood there on his front step, heart pounding, trying to process what he'd just said. Someone made them stop. I walked back to my car, glancing over my shoulder more than once. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying his words. The next morning, I went back to Mr. Brennan's house. He didn't answer. I knocked again. Nothing. A woman walking her dog passed by. "You looking for Bill?" "Yes, do you know where he is?" She frowned. "He left yesterday, said he was visiting family out of state, seemed sudden." I felt my stomach drop. He'd run, and I was starting to understand why. I needed to go back to the beginning. If no one would talk to me about what happened, I'd have to piece together who Grace Kane was before that night. Before the headlines. Before her son became the youngest person ever convicted of murder in the United States. I started with social media. Grace's accounts were still active. Facebook, Instagram, frozen in time like digital tombstones. I scrolled through years of posts looking for cracks in the facade. What I found at first was exactly what you'd expect. Photos of birthday parties. Elias covered in frosting, grinning at the camera. Grace holding him at the park, both of them laughing. Captions like "My whole world" and "Blessed beyond." Measure. There were pictures of a beautiful home. Clean countertops, fresh flowers on the dining table. Everything looked warm, safe, normal. But the more I looked, the more I noticed what wasn't there. There were almost no photos of Grace's husband, Elias's father. In the few images where he appeared, he was always in the background, blurry, distant, like he didn't want to be seen. And in the later posts, something else changed. Grace's smile. In the earlier photos, she looked genuinely happy. But as the timeline moved forward, her expression shifted. The smiles became tighter, forced. Some pictures she wasn't smiling at all, just staring at the camera with a look I couldn't quite read. Sadness, fear. I kept digging. I found a YouTube channel she'd started when Elias was born. Just a handful of videos. Typical mom content. Baby milestones, toy reviews, daily routines. I watched them all. In the first few, she was bubbly, energetic. She talked directly to the camera like she was chatting with a friend. But in the last video, uploaded 3 months before her death, something was off. She seemed distracted, kept glancing to the side, like someone was standing just out of frame. At one point, she started to say something. "I just want to make sure that if anything ever..." Then she stopped mid-sentence. Her face changed. She looked directly at the camera, or maybe at someone behind it, and forced a smile. "Never mind," she said quickly. "Anyway, thanks for watching." The video ended abruptly. I replayed it a dozen times, trying to read between the lines. What was she about to say? I reached out to a few people who had commented on her posts over the years. Most didn't respond, but one woman did. Her name was Lauren. She and Grace had been friends in college. They'd lost touch over the years, but Lauren said she'd always kept an eye on Grace's social media. We met at a quiet diner on the edge of town. Lauren was in her mid-30s with tired eyes and hands that wouldn't stop fidgeting with her coffee cup. "I still can't believe she's gone," Lauren said, softly. "And I can't believe what they said about Elias. That baby couldn't hurt anyone." "What was Grace like?" I asked. "When you knew her?" Lauren smiled faintly. "She was bright, full of life. She wanted to be a teacher. She loved kids. That's why what happened is so..." She stopped, shaking her head. "It doesn't make sense." "When did you last talk to her?" "About a year before she died. We had coffee. She seemed different." "Different how?" Lauren hesitated. "Quieter. Like she was carrying something heavy but didn't want to put it down. I asked if everything was okay at home. She said yes, but I didn't believe her." "Why not?" "Because of the way she said it." Lauren's voice dropped. "She looked me right in the eye and said, 'Everything's fine.' But her hands were shaking." I leaned forward. "Did she say anything else?" Lauren nodded slowly. "She said she wanted to leave. She didn't say where or why, just that she was thinking about taking Elias and starting over somewhere new." "Did she say what was stopping her?" Lauren looked down at her cup. "She said she was afraid." "Of what?" "She didn't say." I pushed, but she shut down. Changed the subject. I should have pushed harder. Her voice cracked. "I should have done something." I gave her a moment. "Lauren," I said gently, "do you think her husband had anything to do with what happened?" She looked up at me, and for the first time I saw something other than sadness in her eyes. Anger. "I don't know," she said, "but I know this. Grace was terrified of that man. She never said it outright, but I could see it. The way she talked about him. The way she avoided certain topics. She was trapped. Did you tell the police this?" She laughed bitterly. "I tried. I called them after she died. Left messages. No one ever called me back." Another name ignored, another voice silenced. I thanked Lauren and left the diner with more questions than answers. That night I went through everything again. The photos, the videos, the timeline, and that's when I saw it. In one of the last photos Grace ever posted, a picture of Elias playing in the yard. I zoomed in on the background. There, barely visible through the window of the house, was a figure, standing, watching. It was too blurry to make out clearly, but the posture was unmistakable. Someone had been watching her, even in her own home. I needed to know exactly what happened the night Grace Kane died. The official police report was vague, almost deliberately so. It listed the time of death as approximately 10:37 p.m. Cause of death: blunt force trauma to the head. Location: the kitchen of the family home. The report stated that Grace had fallen and struck her head on the corner of the granite countertop. Elias had been found nearby, covered in his mother's blood. That was it. No detailed investigation, no reconstruction of events, no interviews with neighbors who might have heard something. Just a conclusion: tragic accident involving a toddler who didn't understand what he'd done. It didn't add up. I started building my own timeline. I requested the 911 call. It took weeks and a formal records request, but I finally got it. The caller wasn't a family member. It was a neighbor, Mrs. Delacroix, who lived across the street. I listened to the recording a dozen times. 911, what's your emergency? I think something's wrong at the house across from me, the Kane house. What makes you think that, ma'am? I heard a scream, a loud one, and then it just stopped. When did you hear this? Maybe 10 minutes ago. I wasn't sure if I should call, but did you see anyone? No, the lights are on inside, but I don't see any movement. I have a bad feeling. The operator dispatched units. 8 minutes later, police arrived. They found Grace's body in the kitchen. Elias was sitting on the floor beside her, quiet and unresponsive. But here's what bothered me. Mrs. Delacroix said she heard a scream at around 10:25 p.m. The estimated time of death was 10:37 p.m., 12 minutes. What happened in those 12 minutes? I went to the neighborhood myself. Knocked on Mrs. Delacroix's door. She was a woman in her 60s. Cautious but kind. She invited me in reluctantly. I've tried to forget that night, she said, sitting across from me in her living room. But I can't. Can you walk me through what you heard? She closed her eyes, as if replaying it in her mind. I was watching TV. The window was cracked open. Because it was a warm night. That's when I heard it, a woman's scream, high-pitched, terrified. Did you hear anything else? She nodded slowly. There was a bang, like something heavy hitting the floor, and then silence. No voices, no crying, nothing. That's what scared me. It was too quiet. Did you see anyone come or go from the house? She hesitated. Mrs. Delacroix? There was a car, she said quietly, parked down the street. I noticed it earlier that evening because it wasn't one I recognized. Dark sedan. It was still there when I called 911, but by the time the police arrived, it was gone. Did you tell the police about the car? I mentioned it, they wrote it down, but no one ever followed up. I felt a familiar frustration rising. Do you remember anything else? Anything at all? She thought for a moment. The lights. What about them? When I looked out the window after I heard the scream, the kitchen light was on. But a few minutes later, it went off. Then it came back on. Someone turned the light off and on. I thought maybe it flickered. But now, I don't know. I thanked her and left. As I walked back to my car, I noticed a small security camera mounted on a house 2 doors down from the Kane's home. It was angled toward the street. I knocked on the door. An older man answered. I explained who I was and asked if his camera had been active the night Grace died. He frowned. Yeah, it was. Police never asked about it, though. Do you still have the footage? I keep everything archived for 6 months, then it auto-deletes, but that was over a year ago. My heart sank. Unless... He scratched his chin. Hold on. He disappeared inside and came back a few minutes later with an old external hard drive. I backed up a bunch of stuff around that time because we had a break-in scare. Might still be on here. He plugged it into his laptop and scrolled through folders. And there it was, footage from the night of Grace's death. We watched it together. The timestamp read 10:15 p.m. The street was empty. A few minutes later, a dark sedan pulled up and parked about 50 feet from the Kane house. No one got out. At 10:26 p.m., the camera picked up audio, a faint, sharp sound, like a scream. At 10:38 p.m., a figure emerged from the Kane house. The angle wasn't perfect, but you could see someone walking quickly to the sedan. They got in. The car drove away. I asked him to rewind. I zoomed in on the figure as much as the resolution would allow. It wasn't a child. It was a full-grown adult. My hands were shaking. "Did you give this to the police?" I asked. He shook his head. Like I said, they never asked. I copied the footage onto a USB drive and left. Back in my car, I sat in silence, staring at the grainy image frozen on my laptop screen. Someone was in that house the night Grace died. Someone who left in a hurry. Someone the police never looked for. And the most chilling part? The audio captured on that security camera, the scream Mrs. Delacroix heard, occurred at 10:26 p.m., 11 minutes before Grace was officially declared dead. Who was in that house for those 11 minutes? And what did they do? I realized I'd been avoiding someone. Elias's father. His name was Marcus Kane, 42 years old. Successful investment banker. Based out of Boston, over 200 miles from where Grace and Elias had lived. He hadn't attended the trial, hadn't given a statement, hadn't visited his son. When reporters tried to reach him, his lawyer issued a single comment. "Mr. Kane is grieving privately and requests that his privacy be respected during this difficult time." That was it. For a man whose wife had died and whose son had been convicted of killing her, Marcus Kane was remarkably silent. I started digging into his background. On paper, he was clean. Harvard MBA, 20 years in finance. No. Criminal record. His social media was sparse, mostly professional updates, charity events, corporate photos. But the more I looked, the stranger things became. Marcus and Grace had been married for 4 years, but they'd lived separately for most of that time. Grace stayed in a modest home in a quiet suburb. Marcus kept an apartment in Boston. Why? I found an interview Grace had done with a local parenting blog 2 years before her death. It was one of those light-hearted Q&A features. One question stood out. "What's the hardest part about being a mom?" Grace's answer, "Doing it alone." The blogger had followed up, asking if she meant she was a single mother. Grace had laughed, awkwardly according to the transcription, and said, "No, I'm married, but my husband's work keeps him away a lot. Sometimes it feels like I'm on my own." I tracked down the blogger. She didn't remember much about the interview, but she did say one thing. Grace seemed sad, like she was trying really hard to sound happy, but it wasn't working. I needed to talk to Marcus. I sent emails, left voicemails, contacted his office. Nothing. Then I tried a different approach. I found out that Marcus donated regularly to a private charity foundation. Their annual gala was coming up in 2 weeks. I bought a ticket. The event was held at an upscale hotel in downtown Boston. Black tie, high-profile guests. I felt out of place, but I didn't care. I spotted Marcus across the room, talking to a group of men in expensive suits. He looked polished, confident, untouchable. I waited until he stepped away to refill his drink. "Mr. Kane?" He turned, his expression neutral. "Yes?" "My name's—" "I know who you are," he interrupted. His tone was cold. "You've been calling my office. I just want to ask you a few questions about— I have nothing to say to you." He started to walk away. "Your son is in a psychiatric facility," I said, loud enough for him to hear. "Don't you care?" He stopped. For a moment, I thought he might turn around, engage. Instead, he kept walking. But as he passed a woman standing near the bar, I saw him whisper something to her. She glanced at me, then quickly looked away. I left the gala with nothing but frustration. But 2 days later, something strange happened. I received an envelope in the mail. No return address. Inside was a single document. A bank transfer receipt. It showed a payment of $50,000 from Marcus Kane to the campaign fund of District Attorney Brian Holloway. The date of the transfer? 3 weeks before Grace's death. I sat there, staring at the receipt, my mind racing. Why would Marcus be donating to the DA's campaign? And why would someone anonymously send this to me? I started looking into DA Holloway. His office had led the prosecution against Elias. He'd personally overseen the case, which was unusual for someone in his position. Then I found something else, a photo from a charity event, dated 5 years earlier. In it, Marcus Kane and Brian Holloway stood side by side, smiling for the camera. They knew each other, and 3 weeks before his wife died, Marcus had given Holloway a significant amount of money. I didn't know what it meant yet, but I knew one thing for certain. Marcus Kane wasn't grieving. He was hiding. I started tracking down everyone who had been close to Grace in the months before she died. The people who saw her every day, the ones who might have noticed if something was wrong, the people the police never bothered to interview. First on my list was Vanessa Torres, the woman who had worked as a part-time nanny for Elias. According to records, she'd been with the family for almost a year before Grace's death. I found her working at a daycare center across town. She was hesitant at first, but when I mentioned Grace's name, her expression softened. "I loved that little boy," she said quietly. "And Grace, she was a good person. She didn't deserve what happened." We sat in her car during her lunch break. She didn't want to talk inside where others might hear. "What was it like working for them?" I asked. Vanessa stared out the window. "At first it was fine. Grace was kind. Always made sure I had everything I needed. But over time, things changed." "Changed how?" "She got quieter, more anxious. Sometimes I'd come over and she'd look like she hadn't slept. I asked her once if everything was okay. What did she say?" Vanessa's voice dropped. "She said she felt trapped, that she wanted to leave but didn't know how." "Did she say why?" "No, but she was scared of him." "Marcus?" Vanessa nodded. "She never said his name, but I knew. The way she'd tense up whenever he called. The way she'd check her phone constantly like she was afraid of missing something." "Did Marcus come to the house often?" "Not really, maybe once a month, but when he did, Grace would send me home early. She didn't want me around when he was there." I leaned forward. "Vanessa, did you ever tell the police any of this?" She shook her head. "They never asked. No one contacted me. After Grace died, it was like I didn't exist." I felt the anger rising again. Another witness ignored. "There's something else," Vanessa said, her voice barely above a whisper. "What?" "A few weeks before she died, Grace asked me to do something strange." "What did she ask?" "She gave me a USB drive. Told me to keep it safe and not look at it. She said if anything ever happened to her, I should give it to someone I trusted." My heart started pounding. "Do you still have it?" Vanessa looked at me, her eyes filled with regret. "I wish I did. After Grace died, I got scared. I didn't know what was on it, and I didn't want to get involved, so I threw it away." The disappointment must have shown on my face. "I'm sorry," she said, tears welling up. "I was afraid. I had my own kids to think about." "It's okay," I said, even though it wasn't. "But there's one more thing," she added. "A few days after the funeral, someone came to my house." "Who?" "I don't know, a man in a suit. He said he was with Marcus's legal team. He asked if Grace had given me anything before she died. Documents, recordings, anything like that." "What did you tell him?" I lied. I said no. But the way he looked at me, it was like he didn't believe me. He gave me his card and told me to call if I remembered anything. Then he left. "Do you still have the card?" She nodded and pulled it from her wallet. I looked at the name. Richard Brennan, private investigator. Not a lawyer, an investigator. Marcus had sent someone to track down whatever Grace had left behind. "Did he ever come back?" I asked. "No, but a week later my car was broken into. Nothing was stolen, But everything was searched. My glove box, under the seats, everything. She looked at me, fear still visible in her eyes. I knew then that I'd made the right choice throwing that USB away. Whatever was on it, someone wanted it gone. I thanked Vanessa and left. But as I drove away, something didn't sit right. If Marcus sent someone to retrieve whatever Grace had hidden, that meant he knew she'd been documenting something, which meant he knew she was afraid, and he did nothing to stop what happened to her. Or worse, he made sure it happened. That night I received a phone call from an unknown number. I answered. There was silence on the other end, just breathing. Then a voice, low, calm, deliberate. Stop. Digging. Who is this? You don't know what you're walking into. Let it go. I'm not stopping. A pause. Then you're making a mistake. The line went dead. I sat there staring at my phone. Someone was watching, and they wanted me to know it. The case had been everywhere. For 3 weeks. Straight, every major news outlet covered it. Cable news, online media, even late-night talk shows made jokes about the absurdity of a toddler on trial. But the coverage wasn't just widespread, it was uniform. Almost every story followed the same angle. Grace Kane, troubled mother, possible. Postpartum issues, a tragic accident that spiraled out of control. Some outlets even suggested Elias had developmental problems, that he'd shown signs of aggression. He was 2 years old. I started collecting articles, transcripts, video segments. I wanted to see how the narrative had been shaped. And that's when I noticed something strange. A significant number of the stories, especially the ones pushing the troubled mother angle, came from the same 3 media outlets. All of them had published nearly identical pieces within days of each other. Same talking points, same experts quoted, same insinuations. It felt coordinated. I dug into the ownership of those outlets. 2 were owned by subsidiaries of larger media conglomerations. The third was independently run but heavily funded by private donors. I started looking at those donors. And there it was, the Kane Foundation, a charitable organization founded by Marcus Kane 5 years earlier. Its stated mission was to support mental health initiatives and child welfare programs. Noble, on the surface. But when I looked at the foundation's financial disclosures, I found something else. In the 6 months leading up to Grace's death, the Kane Foundation had made significant donations to all 3 media outlets, not as advertisements, as sponsorships for investigative journalism and public interest reporting. In other words, Marcus had been funding the very outlets that shaped the public narrative about his wife's death. I reached out to a journalist who had written one of the early profiles on Grace, a piece that painted her as unstable and overwhelmed. Her name was Michelle Pruitt. She worked for one of the outlets that had received Kane Foundation money. She agreed to meet me at a coffee shop downtown. Michelle was in her 40s, sharp and professional, but when I brought up the Kane case, her demeanor shifted. That story still bothers me, she admitted. Why? Because I didn't write it the way I wanted to. I frowned. What do you mean? She hesitated, then leaned in closer. I did the research. I interviewed people, and nothing about Grace Kane suggested she was unstable. She was organized, caring, loved her son. But when I submitted my draft, my editor sent it back with notes. What kind of notes? Suggestions. Reframe this. Emphasize that. Add a quote from a psychologist about postpartum depression. Make it clear she was struggling. Did your editor say why? Michelle looked uncomfortable. He said it was about balance, giving the full picture. But it didn't feel like balance. It felt like spin. Did you push back? I tried. But then I found out our outlet had just received a grant from the Kane Foundation. A big one. And suddenly my editor's pressure made sense. You think the foundation influenced the coverage? She didn't answer directly. All I know is that after my article ran, I felt sick, because I knew it wasn't the truth. It was a version of the truth someone wanted told. I showed her the financial records I'd found, the donations from Marcus's foundation to her outlet and others. She stared at the documents, shaking her head. I didn't know it was this direct. Did you ever try to write a follow-up? Correct the record? I pitched it, she said. My editor killed it. Said the story was over, public had moved on. But the public hadn't moved on. They'd just accepted the narrative they'd been fed. There's something else, Michelle said. After the trial ended, I got a call from someone claiming to be a family friend of the Canes. They thanked me for my sensitive coverage. Then they asked if I'd be interested in an exclusive interview with Marcus. Did you take it? I said yes. But the interview never happened. Instead, I got an email from a PR firm saying Marcus had decided not to speak publicly, but they appreciated my work and hoped we could collaborate in the future. Collaborate how? They didn't say, but the tone was clear. They were keeping tabs on friendly journalists. I left the meeting with a clearer picture. Marcus hadn't just influenced the legal system. He'd bought the media narrative. He'd made sure that by the time the trial started, public opinion had already convicted Grace, not him. And when a 2-year-old was sentenced, people were too shocked by the absurdity to ask the right questions. Later that night, I went through my own article archives. I found opinion pieces, blog posts, social media threads, all echoing the same talking points. Grace was overwhelmed. She probably snapped. Tragic accident. No one questioned why Marcus wasn't there, why he'd never been investigated, why a man with means and motive had been completely overlooked. Because the story had already been written for them. And Marcus Kane had paid for every word. I needed something concrete, something Grace had left behind in her own words. I'd heard about the diaries from Lauren, Grace's college friend, but I didn't know if they still existed, or if I could get access to them. I started by tracking down Grace's family. Her parents had both passed years earlier. She had one sibling, a younger cousin named Rebecca, who lived in Vermont. I called her. She was hesitant at first, but when I explained what I was trying to do, her tone softened. Grace deserved better than what happened to her. Rebecca said quietly, "If you're trying to find the truth, I'll help however I can. Did Grace ever talk to you about her marriage?" Not directly. She was private, but I could tell something was wrong. She stopped calling as much, stopped visiting. When I'd ask if she was okay, she'd change the subject. Did she leave anything behind, letters, journals, anything like that? Rebecca paused. Actually, yes. After she died, I went to the house to collect some of her things before Marcus sold it. I found a few notebooks in her bedroom. I've kept them ever since. My heart raced. Would you be willing to let me see them? Another pause. Yes, but not over the phone. Come to Vermont, we'll talk in person. 2 days later, I was sitting in Rebecca's living room. She handed me a small box. Inside were 3 spiral notebooks, their covers worn and pages dog-eared. I haven't read all of it, Rebecca admitted. It felt too personal, but what I did read, it scared me. I opened the first notebook. The early entries were mundane, grocery lists, reminders, thoughts about Elias's development. But as I moved further in, the tone shifted. He called again today. Wanted to know where I'd been, who I'd talked to. I told him I just went to the park with Elias. He didn't believe me. He never believes me. I feel like I'm being watched all the time, even when he's not here. I tried to open a separate bank account today. The application was denied. I don't understand why. Unless... Did he block it somehow? I kept reading. The entries became darker, more desperate. I can't leave. I've tried to plan it 100 times, but every path leads nowhere. He controls everything. The money, the house, even my phone. Sometimes I think about what would happen if I just disappeared. Would anyone even notice? Would anyone care? Then, 3 months before her death, the entries changed again. I'm going to start recording things. Not here. Somewhere he can't find. If something happens to me, people need to know the truth. I told Vanessa to hold on to something for me. I trust her. She's the only one. The USB drive, the one Vanessa had thrown away. I kept flipping through the pages, and then I found it. An entry from 2 weeks before Grace died. He knows. I don't know how, but he knows I've been documenting everything. He didn't say it outright, but I can tell the way he looked at me last night, the way he smiled. He said, "You should be more careful, Grace. Accidents happen." I'm scared. I don't know what to do. I thought about going to the police, but what would I even say? That my husband is controlling? That I feel unsafe? They'd tell me to get a divorce. They don't understand. He won't let me go. He's made that clear. If something happens to me, don't believe what they tell you. Look in the blue box in the basement. That's where I've hidden everything. I stopped reading. The blue box. Rebecca was watching me closely. What is it? Did you ever go back to the house after it was sold? I asked. No, why? Grace mentioned hiding something, a blue box in the basement. Rebecca's face went pale. I never checked the basement. I didn't even think to. I looked up the property records. The house had been sold 6 months after Grace's death. The new owners had renovated extensively. I called them anyway. A woman answered. I explained who I was and why I was calling. She was skeptical at first, but when I mentioned Grace's name, she softened. We bought the house as is, she said. The previous owner wanted it gone fast. We gutted most of it. When we moved in, did you find anything unusual? A box maybe, something hidden? She thought for a moment. Actually, yes. When we redid the basement, we found a small lockbox behind a false panel in the wall. We didn't know what to do with it, so we kept it in storage. Do you still have it? I think so. Hold on. I waited, barely breathing. She came back on the line. Yeah, it's here. Blue metal box, locked. We never opened it. Can I come see it? She hesitated. I guess. But I want to be there when you open it. I drove 4 hours to reach the house. The woman, her name was Clara, led me to the garage. She pulled the blue box from a shelf and set it on a workbench. It was small, about the size of a shoebox, with a combination lock. Any idea what the code might be? Clara asked. I thought back to the diaries. Grace's birthday, Elias's birthday, their anniversary. None of them, Sue. Worked. Then I remembered something. In one of the early journal entries, Grace had written about the day she and Marcus first met. October 14th. I tried 10:14. The lock clicked open. Inside was a USB drive, a stack of printed emails, and a folded piece of paper. I unfolded the paper. It was a handwritten note from Grace. If you're reading this, I'm already gone. Everything you need is on the drive. Please make sure Elias is safe. Don't let him stay with Marcus. Please. My hands were shaking. I looked at Clara. Can I take this? She nodded. I drove straight home and plugged the USB into my laptop. There were dozens of files, audio recordings, video clips, scanned documents. I opened the first video. Grace's face filled the screen. She looked exhausted, afraid. My name is Grace Kane, she said, her voice trembling. And if you're watching this, it means I didn't make it out. I watched every video on that USB drive. Grace had recorded herself over several weeks, detailing years of psychological abuse, financial control, and escalating threats from Marcus. In one video, she showed bank statements proving he'd locked her out of their accounts. In another, she played a voicemail where Marcus calmly told her, "You'll never take my son from me, I'll make sure of that." But the most chilling video was the last one. Grace sat in her car, parked somewhere isolated. Her hands trembled as she held the camera. "I think he's planning something," she whispered. "He's been too calm, too confident. He told me yesterday that if I ever tried to leave with Elias, he'd make sure I never saw him again. And then he said something that I can't stop thinking about." She paused, wiping tears from her face. He said, "Accidents happen, Grace, especially to careless mothers." He smiled when he said it, like he'd already decided. She looked directly into the camera. "If something happens to me, please don't let them blame Elias. He's just a baby. He didn't do anything. It was Marcus, It's always been Marcus. The video ended. I sat in silence, staring at the screen. This was it. This was the evidence that should have cleared Elias, that should have put Marcus on trial. But it had been hidden, buried, lost. And the one person who should have fought for Elias, his lawyer, had failed him. I needed to know why. Her name was Diana Frost. She'd been a public defender for 12 years. The Kane case had been assigned to her by the court. I found her working at a small non-profit legal clinic on the outskirts of the city. When I called, she was reluctant to meet, but I told her I had new evidence. That changed her mind. We met at a park bench near her office. Diana was in her late 30s with tired eyes and an air of defeat that seemed permanent. "I knew you'd come eventually," she said as she sat down. "Why do you say that?" "Because I've been waiting for someone to ask the right questions. No one ever did." "What happened during the trial?" I asked. "Why? Didn't you fight harder for Elias?" Her jaw tightened. "You think I didn't want to? You think I didn't know that case was insane? Then why?" "Because I was blocked at every turn," she said, her voice rising. "I requested a psychological evaluation for Elias. Denied. I asked for a forensic review. The scene. Denied. I tried to subpoena Marcus Kane. My request was overruled." "By who?" "The judge. Every single motion I filed, he shut down. He said the evidence was clear, the case was straightforward, and I was wasting the court's time." "That's not normal." "No, it's not." She looked at me. She looked. Anger flashing in her eyes. I knew something was wrong, so I started digging. I found out the judge had connections to Marcus. They'd served on a charity board together. I filed a motion for recusal. It was denied. "Did you appeal?" "I tried, but before I could, I started getting pressure from my supervisor. He told me to stop making waves, to accept the plea deal the prosecution was offering." "What plea deal?" "Life in a psychiatric facility instead of prison. They framed it as mercy, but it was just another way to bury the case." "And you took it?" Diana's face crumpled. "I had no choice." A week before the trial was supposed to end, someone broke into my house. Nothing was stolen, but my daughter's bedroom was trashed. Her stuffed animals were lined up on her bed in a row. It was a message. She pulled a crumpled piece of paper from her bag and handed it to me. It was a note written in block letters. "We know where your daughter goes to school." I felt a chill run through me. "I have a 10-year-old, Diana said, her voice breaking. I couldn't risk it, so I told Elias's guardian to accept the deal, and I've hated myself every day since." "Who do you think sent the note?" "I don't know. But 2 days after the trial ended, I got a call from a law firm in Boston. They offered me a job, triple my salary. All I had to do was sign an NDA about the Kane case and never speak about it publicly." "Did you take it?" She shook her head. "I told them to go to hell, but the threat worked. I stopped pushing. I stopped asking questions." She looked at me with hollow eyes. "That little boy is in a facility because I was too scared to protect him. I failed him." "It's not your fault," I said. "The system failed him." "The system was rigged," she corrected, "and I let it happen. And I let it." I showed her the USB drive, told her what was on it. Her face went pale. "Grace recorded all of that?" "Yes, and it was never entered into evidence." "Because no one knew it existed," Diana said. "If I'd had this, everything would have been different." "It's not too late," I said. "We can reopen the case. Use this as new evidence." She laughed bitterly. "You think they'll let you? You think Marcus Kane will just let you waltz into court with a USB drive and destroy everything he's built?" "I have to try." She looked at me for a long moment, then sighed. "Then you'd better be ready, because once you go public with this, they'll come for you. The same way they came for me. I don't care. You should." She stood up, preparing to leave. "Because they don't just threaten, they follow through." As she walked away, she turned back one last time. "Be careful," she said. "And whatever you do, Don't trust the system to protect you. It won't. I couldn't stop thinking about Marcus's financial ties to the case, the donation to the DA, the media sponsorships, the job offer to Diana. Money had been used as a weapon, to influence, to silence, to control. But there was one angle I hadn't fully explored yet. Grace's life insurance policy. I started digging through public records, financial disclosures, anything I could find that might show a paper trail. It took weeks, but I finally found it buried in probate court documents. Grace had a life insurance policy worth $2 million. The policy had been taken out 13 months before her death, and Marcus was the sole beneficiary. That alone wasn't proof of anything. Married couples often have life insurance policies on each other. But then I found something else. The application for the policy had been signed by someone with power of attorney over Grace's financial affairs, Marcus Kane. Grace had never signed it herself. I contacted the insurance company, claiming to be researching the case for a documentary. They wouldn't give me details, but they confirmed the policy had been paid out in full 6 months after Grace's death. $2 million, directly into Marcus's account. I cross-referenced that timeline with other financial records I'd obtained. 3 weeks after receiving the payout, Marcus made a significant investment in a private real estate venture. He bought a vacation property in the Bahamas. He donated another $100,000 to a political action committee. He wasn't grieving. He was spending. I needed to talk to someone who understood financial fraud. I reached out to an old contact, a forensic accountant named Gerald Moss. He'd helped me with a previous investigation into corporate embezzlement. We met at his office downtown. I showed him everything I had, the insurance policy, the power of attorney, the donation to the DA, the transfers after Grace's death. Gerald studied the documents carefully, his expression growing darker. "This is textbook financial abuse," he said. Finally, he isolated her financially, controlled her access to money, then took out a policy on her life without her knowledge. Is that legal? Technically, if he had power of attorney, yes, but morally, ethically, it's predatory. Can we prove he planned her death? Gerald leaned back in his chair. Proving intent is hard, but the timeline is damning. He secures financial control, takes out a massive life insurance policy, and she's dead a year later. Any reasonable investigator should have flagged this. They didn't. Because they weren't looking, Gerald said. Or they were told not. Dries, he pulled up a financial database on his computer. "Let me check something." He typed quickly, scanning through records. "Here," he said, pointing at the screen. A week after Grace died, Marcus transferred $50,000 to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. It was routed through 2 shell companies to obscure the origin. Why would he do that? Usually, to hide money from taxes or legal scrutiny. But in this case, Gerald paused. It could have been a payoff. To who? I don't know, but whoever received it didn't want it traced. He kept digging. "There's more," he said. 6 months before Grace's death, Marcus took out a loan against their home, without her signature. He used the same power of attorney. The loan was for $300,000. What did he use the money for? Gerald scrolled through the records. It's unclear. The funds were dispersed to several different accounts. Some went to business investments, but a large chunk, about $100,000, went to a private security firm. Security for what? I can't tell from this, but the firm specializes in personal protection, surveillance, and investigations. My stomach turned. He hired people to watch her, I said. Possibly, or worse. I thought back to Grace's journal entries. I feel like I'm being watched all the time. She wasn't paranoid. She was right. I asked Gerald to send me copies of everything he'd found. He did, but he also gave me a warning. If you're going to expose this, you need to be ready for what comes next. People who move money like this don't do it in the open. They have lawyers, fixers, people who make problems disappear. I know. I'm serious, he said. Marcus Kane isn't just wealthy. He's connected. And if he's willing to kill his wife and frame his own son, what do you think he'll do to you? I didn't have an answer. That night, I compiled everything into a folder. The financial records, the videos from Grace, the witness statements. I was building a case, but I needed one more piece. I needed to prove that Marcus wasn't just financially connected to the people who prosecuted Elias. He'd orchestrated the entire thing. I decided to go back to the one person who might know. DA Brian Holloway. I called his office and requested an interview. As expected, I was denied, so I waited outside the courthouse. 3 days. Later, I saw him leaving through a side entrance. "Mr. Holloway," I called out, jogging to catch up. He stopped, his expression guarded. "I don't give interviews." "I'm not asking for an interview. I just want to know why you accepted $50,000 from Marcus Kane before prosecuting his son." His face went pale. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do. It's public record. The donation went to your campaign fund." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "That donation was legal, and it had nothing to do with the Kane case." "Then why did you personally oversee the prosecution? Why did you block evidence? Why did you push for a conviction against a 2-year-old? "I followed the law." "You followed orders," I said. For a moment, something flickered in his eyes. Fear? Guilt? Then he turned and walked away. But as he did, he said something over his shoulder. "You should stop asking questions you don't want answered." I stood there, watching him disappear into the parking garage. He was scared, and that meant I was getting close. I got a call from an unknown number at 6:42 a.m. I almost didn't answer, but something told me to pick up. "Hello?" A man's voice, older, hesitant. "You're the one making the documentary about the Kane boy?" "Yes, who is this?" A long pause. "My name is Carl Hubbard. I used to work for Marcus Kane. I need to talk to you." My heart started racing. "When?" "Today, but not on the phone and not anywhere public." He gave me an address, a diner 2 towns over. I arrived early and waited in a booth near the back. Carl showed up 20 minutes later. He was in his 60s, thin, with the look of someone who hadn't slept well in years. He sat down without ordering anything. "I shouldn't be here," he said quietly. "Then why?" "Are you?" "Because I can't live with it anymore." He looked at me with hollow eyes. "I was there the night Grace Kane died." I froze. "What do you mean you were there?" "I did maintenance and groundskeeping for the Kanes. I was at the house that evening fixing a drainage issue in the backyard." "Did you see what happened?" He nodded slowly. "I saw Marcus arrive around 9 p.m. I thought it was strange because Grace had told me he wasn't supposed to be there that week." "Did you see him go inside?" "Yes, and I heard them arguing. Loud. Grace was crying, begging him to leave. He wouldn't." "What happened next?" Carl's hands trembled. "I heard a crash, then silence. I should have gone inside. I should have checked. But I was scared, so I stayed outside like a coward." "How long was he in there?" "Maybe 20 minutes. When he came out, he looked calm. Too calm. He got in his car and left." "And Grace?" "I went to the door, knocked, no answer. I looked through the window and saw her on the floor. There was blood, and Elias was sitting next to her, just staring." My throat tightened. "I called 911 from my truck, didn't leave my name, then I drove away." "Why didn't you tell the police?" "Because 2 days later a man came to my house, said he worked for Marcus. He offered me $50,000 to forget what I saw." "And you took it?" Carl's face crumpled. "I have a daughter with medical bills. I needed the money. So I took it and I kept my mouth shut, but that little boy, he's paying for what I didn't say." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded check. It was made out to Carl Hubbard, $50,000, signed by Marcus Kane. "I never cashed it," he said. "I couldn't. It's been sitting in my desk drawer for over a year." He slid it across the table. "I'll testify," he said. "If it helps that boy, I'll tell them everything." I looked at the check. Proof. Finally, I had proof that Marcus had paid someone to stay silent. "Thank you," I said. Carl stood to leave but hesitated. "Be careful," he said. "Marcus Kane doesn't let people walk away." "Did he threaten you?" Carl didn't answer. He just walked out. I had everything I needed: the videos, the financial records, the witness testimony. It was time to go to the authorities. I started with the FBI. I submitted a formal complaint, including copies of all the evidence I'd gathered. 3 weeks later, I got a response. "After reviewing the materials provided, we have determined that this matter falls under state jurisdiction. Please contact your local district attorney's office." They'd passed it off. I tried the state attorney general. Same result. I contacted the police department that had handled the original investigation. They refused to reopen the case. "The matter has been adjudicated," the deputy chief told me. "Unless you have evidence of procedural misconduct, we can't help you." I did have evidence of misconduct, but no one would look at it. I realized then what Diana had been trying to tell me. The system wasn't broken. It was bought. Every door I knocked on had already been locked from the inside. Marcus had made sure of it. I'd had enough. If the system wouldn't listen, I'd force Marcus to answer directly. I tracked down his office address in Boston and showed up unannounced. The receptionist tried to stop me, but I pushed past her and walked straight into his office. Marcus was sitting behind a large mahogany desk, perfectly composed. He didn't look surprised to see me. "I was wondering when you'd show up," he said calmly. I threw the evidence folder onto his desk. "I know what you did." He glanced at it but didn't open it. "You don't know anything. I have Grace's videos. I have the financial records. I have a witness who saw you at the house that night." For the first time, something shifted in his expression. "Careful," he said quietly. "Or what? You'll have me killed too." He stood, buttoning his jacket. "You're making a mistake. The only mistake was thinking you'd get away with this." He walked around the desk, stopping inches from me. "You think you're the first person to try this?" he said, his voice cold. "You're not, and you won't be the last, but they all learned the same lesson eventually." "What lesson?" He smiled. "That truth doesn't matter when no one's listening." He walked out, leaving me standing there alone. That night, my apartment was broken into. My laptop was gone. So were my backup drives. I was devastated. Everything I'd worked for, gone. But I'd learned to be careful. I'd uploaded copies of everything to a secure cloud server weeks ago. They'd taken my hardware, but not the evidence. I retrieved the files and kept going. Then, 3 days later, I got a call from Rebecca, Grace's cousin. "I found something," she said, her voice shaking. "I was going through the box again and there was a hidden pocket in the lining. I missed it the first time." "What was in it?" "Another USB drive, smaller. It was taped inside." She overnighted it to me. When I plugged it in, there was only one file. A video, dated the day before Grace died. I clicked play. Grace's face filled the screen. She'd been crying. "If you're watching this, I'm already dead," she said, her voice trembling. "And I know exactly how it happened." She took a shaky breath. "Marcus told me tonight what he's going to do. He said he's going to kill me and make it look like Elias did it. He said no one will believe a 2-year-old could be guilty, so they'll call it an accident, and he'll walk away clean." Tears streamed down her face. "He's been planning this for months. He said even if people suspect him, he's made sure no one will be able to prove it. He has judges, lawyers, money, everything." She looked directly into the camera. "Please, don't let him get away with this. And please, save my son." The video ended. I sat in stunned silence. Grace had known. She'd known exactly what was going to happen. And she'd recorded it. This was the smoking gun. I released the documentary online, every video, every document, every witness statement. I didn't wait for permission. I didn't go through traditional channels. I uploaded it directly to the public and let it spread. Within hours, it went viral. Millions of views, thousands of shares. People were outraged. The media, the same outlets that had buried the story before, suddenly couldn't ignore it. Protests began outside the courthouse, outside Marcus's office. People demanded justice for Elias. 2 weeks later, the case was reopened. Marcus Kane was arrested and charged with murder. Carl Hubbard testified. Diana came forward with her story. The financial records were examined. Grace's videos were entered into evidence. The trial lasted 3 months. Marcus was acquitted. His legal team argued that the videos were circumstantial, that Carl's testimony was unreliable because he'd accepted money, that there was no physical evidence tying Marcus to the scene. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Not guilty. Elias remained in the psychiatric facility. I tried to appeal, tried to push further, but my career was destroyed. I was sued for defamation. My bank accounts were frozen. I lost everything. Marcus Kane walked free, and the truth, no matter how loud, no matter how clear, didn't matter, because the system was never designed to protect people like Grace, or Elias, or me. I visit Elias sometimes. He's 7 now. He doesn't remember his mother, doesn't understand why he's there, but I made him a promise. I'll keep telling his story, even if no one listens, because some truths are worth destroying yourself for, even when they destroy you first.